I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, as we approach the 10th anniversary of 9/11 attacks, we're reminded that a key recommendation of the 9/11 Commission is still not completely addressed. That is the security of the most commonly used form of identification in the United States, driver's license. All but one of the 9/11 hijackers carried some form of government-issued ID, mostly state driver's license, many of which were obtained on fraudulent manners. During the planning stages of the attacks, these documents were used to rent vehicles, evade law enforcement officials, enroll in flight school, and board airplanes. In 2005, Congress passed and the President signed the Real ID Act to address this security gap and require states to meet certain security standards for the issuance of driver's license and identification cards. Despite that action 6 years ago, Real ID has yet to be fully implemented. My distinguished colleague, the Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Smith, has some views to offer on this important topic, and I yield for the gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the gentleman from Alabama for yielding. He is absolutely correct. On September 11, 2001, Americans were attacked by foreign nationals who were able to exploit our laws and live unnoticed in the United States. The 19 hijackers obtained 17 driver's licenses from Arizona, California, and Florida, and 13 state-issued IDs from Florida, Virginia, and Maryland. With these licenses and identification cards, they boarded the planes they used to murder over 3,000 innocent Americans. The 9/11 Commission recommended that, quote, the federal government should set standards for the issuance of birth certificates and sources of identification, such as driver's licenses. Fraud in identification documents is no longer just a problem of theft. At many entry points to vulnerable facilities, including gates for boarding aircraft, sources of identification are the last opportunity to ensure that people are who they say they are and to check whether they are terrorists, end quote. Congress paid attention and passed the Real ID Act. The law is critical to national security. This administration has undermined the Real ID Act at every turn. They extended the compliance deadline 2 times, most recently last March. So now states do not have to be Real ID compliant until January 15, 2013. That is 11.5 years after the 9/11 attacks. And Secretary Napolitano consistently pushes for repeal of Real ID instead of compliance. Most recently, during a March 9, 2011 Senate Judiciary hearing, she urged Congress to take a fresh look at legislation that would actually repeal the Real ID Act. States are making progress on Real ID. In fact, as of March 29, 2011, Maryland, Tennessee, Connecticut, South Dakota, and Delaware have submitted full compliance certification packages to DHS. 23 other states are compliant and/or are issuing compliant documents. 4 additional states have enhanced driver's license programs comparable to Real ID guidelines. For these reasons, congressional support, including funding, is critical to Real ID implementation. I am concerned that H.R. 2017's grant reform initiative may give the impression that Congress no longer supports Real ID funding. So I ask the gentleman from Alabama, how do you respond to that concern?
Mr. Chairman, I thank the gentleman for yielding back, and I strongly support the Real ID implementation. Real ID is the law. The Department has an obligation to support the states in moving forward toward full compliance with enhanced driver's license security. Congress has appropriated a steady stream of funding for Real ID since 2006, $295 million to be exact. Additionally, driver's license security is an allowable expense under the state Homeland Security grant program. So the actions taken in this bill should in no way be taken as a sign of diminishing support for Real ID implementation.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the gentleman for that statement, and I ask him if he would yield for another minute.
Yes, I yield the gentleman from Texas for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the remarks of the gentleman from Alabama and his endorsement of the Real ID Act. The risk to not implementing Real ID is great. Perhaps most recently this was evidenced by the facts surrounding the February arrest of Khalid al-Dosari in Texas on a federal charge of attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction. According to the arrest affidavit, when the FBI searched his residence, they found his journal in which he wrote of the need to obtain a forged U.S. birth certificate, multiple driver's licenses, and a U.S. passport. He planned to use those driver's licenses to rent several cars, each with a different license, specifically to avoid detection. So terrorists are still planning to exploit the weaknesses in our driver's license issuance processes in order to attack us. If we don't do everything in our power to prevent that from happening by fully implementing Real ID, we set ourselves up for another attack. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with the gentleman from Alabama as this bill moves forward and on future appropriation bills to support states as they move toward full implementation of Real ID. I'll yield back.
Has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I withdraw any action right now.